man's desperate solitude led him to a desperate act. He bought a disabled girl, a child sold by her own stepfather. What could possibly arrive in the mail after such a transaction, and what grim truths would it unravel? Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The wind howled its ancient song through the pine boughs, a mournful dirge echoing the emptiness inside Elias. He stood, a hulking silhouette against the last blush of a dying sun, the scent of fresh-cut timber, a familiar comfort, yet an unwelcome reminder of his solitary existence. His calloused hands, once capable of felling giants, now trembled slightly as he considered the proposition laid before him, a whisper of human connection bought at a terrible price. Across from him, a man whose eyes held the cold gleam of river ice spoke of inconvenience and burden, his words chipping away at the last vestiges of Elias's moral compass. The girl, he called her a drain, a permanent shadow on his meager life, a burden to be shed. Elias had seen her huddled in the back of the wagon, a small, still form, her eyes distant and shadowed, holding a universe of untold pain. He knew with a certainty that chilled him deeper than the biting wind, that he was walking into a darkness from which there might be no return. Yet, the cabin, once a sanctuary, had become a tomb of silence, its walls pressing in, echoing only his own heavy breaths. He pictured the small unused bed, the untouched hearth, the empty spaces that had long cried out for another presence, any presence. This was not compassion, not entirely. It was a desperate gamble against the encroaching tide of his own despair. What did it mean to buy a soul? The question hung in the frigid air, unanswered, a promise of complicated sorrow. He saw the flicker of calculation in the stepfather's gaze, the predatory hunger that sought to capitalize on Elias's quiet desperation. The money, a meager sum for a human life, felt heavy in his hands, a leaden weight of complicity. He counted it out, each coin a silent indictment, each clink a hammer blow against his dwindling sense of self. The silence that followed was thick, pregnant with unspoken horrors, a silence broken only by the distant caw of a crow, a harbinger of something vast and unknowable arriving in his solitary life. He wondered briefly if he was saving her, or merely damning himself further. The bargain was struck, sealed not by words, but by the shudder that ran through the small frame of the girl, a shudder Elias felt deep within his own weary bones. The wagon rumbled away, leaving Elias and the girl, Ilara, standing in the stark silence of the clearing. Her small body, delicate and unmoving in his arms, felt feather-light yet impossibly heavy. He carried her over the threshold of his cabin, a threshold he had crossed alone for decades, each step an echo of solitude. Inside, the cabin, usually a refuge of rugged comfort, seemed to shrink, suddenly too small for the vastness of the predicament he had invited in. He laid her gently on the cot, its rough wool blanket a stark contrast to her pale skin. She lay unmoving, her breath barely stirring the air, her eyes fixed on some unseen point above, or perhaps simply seeing nothing at all. Her disability, a silent, pervasive presence, made itself known not through noise or struggle, but through an unnerving stillness, a profound detachment that spoke volumes of a world she could not fully engage. Elias, a man of trees and solitude, found himself adrift in a sea of helplessness. He knew how to mend a broken axe handle, how to coax fire from flint, but how did one bridge the chasm of silence that separated him from this fragile being? He boiled water for tea, the clatter of the pot a jarring intrusion in the quiet space. He watched her from across the room, a looming, awkward figure unsure whether to speak, to touch, or simply to exist in her presence. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of expectation, with the raw, exposed nerves of two souls suddenly, violently entwined. She did not cry, did not make a sound, only lay there, a porcelain doll whose gaze held a secret he could not decipher. He felt a profound sense of ineptitude, a lumbering beast attempting to nurture a wilting flower. The quiet hum of the stove was the loudest sound, a constant reminder of the life he was trying, clumsily, to sustain. A flicker of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced him. What had he done? Had he, in his loneliness, merely replaced one burden with another, a quiet sorrow with a profound, unanswerable responsibility? The first night was long, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the agonizing rhythm of his own thundering heart, a drumbeat against the overwhelming stillness. Weeks bled into months, each day a slow, arduous climb up a mountain of unspoken needs and unfulfilled expectations. Ilara remained largely unresponsive, a shadow clinging to the edges of Elias's life. He would leave her food meticulously prepared by her bedside. Sometimes it was eaten, sometimes not. He would speak to her gruffly at first, then with a soft, hesitant tremor, telling her about the forest, the changing seasons, the stubbornness of the old pine by the creek. Her eyes would occasionally track his movements, a flicker of awareness that gave him a fleeting, desperate hope. He found himself often staring at the small, worn wooden bird clutched in her hand, a small carved sparrow. It was her only possession, a silent sentinel she never released. He wondered about its origins, about the hands that carved it, about the life it represented before it came to his stark cabin. Was it a gift from a loving mother? A piece of a shattered past she held on to? He felt an almost visceral need to understand, to piece together the fragments of her story that remained shrouded in mystery. He remembered the stepfather's callous indifference, his dismissal of her as a thing, not a person. A vague, unsettling memory surfaced from Elias's own past, a similar chill of abandonment, a profound sense of being unwanted. He had been a wild, unmanageable boy, sent away from his family home to an uncle's farm, where silence was the only language and hard labor the only lesson. He saw a kindred spirit in her stillness, a mirroring of his own sequestered existence. One raw morning, he found a small, meticulously drawn sketch beneath her cot, a crude but recognizable depiction of the wooden bird, rendered with an intensity that surprised him. She could draw. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a sudden, blinding flash of light in the pervasive darkness. It was a crack in the wall, a whisper of a voice. He looked at the sketch, then at the girl, a profound shift occurring within him, a softening of the granite he had built around his heart. This wasn't a burden. This was a mystery, a fragile, wounded soul waiting to be seen. He decided then, with a quiet resolve that settled deep in his bones, that he would not simply provide for her. He would see her. The world outside, harsh and unyielding, seemed to fade, replaced by the silent, challenging landscape of their shared existence within the small cabin. The discovery of the sketch shifted something fundamental within Elias. It was not merely a drawing. It was a testament, a silent scream of existence. He found more, tucked away beneath the cot in the folds of her worn shawl. Small, detailed sketches of the cabin's interior, of a squirrel darting across the window pane, of the gnarled oak outside, all rendered with an astonishing precision that belied her apparent detachment. She was observing, processing, creating, even as the world around her seemed to believe her absent. Elias began to leave pencils and scraps of paper within her reach, a silent invitation, a tentative bridge. He watched, often from the doorway, as her small, delicate fingers, once so still, now moved with a focused intensity, tracing lines, creating form. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her hand, a slight physical challenge that made her artistry even more remarkable. He began to understand that her stillness was not absence, but a profound form of presence, an intense absorption in her inner world. The world outside the cabin, with its societal expectations and cruel judgments, seemed a distant, irrelevant hum. Here, in the quiet embrace of the towering pines, a different kind of bond began to forge itself, born not of words, but of shared silence, of unspoken understanding. He found himself looking forward to coming home, to the quiet rustle of her movements, the faint scratch of pencil on paper. The cabin, once a place of solitary echoes, now held a delicate hum of shared life. He began to leave small, curious objects by her cot, a smooth river stone, a particularly striking pine cone, a discarded feather, and in return, he would find them sketched, transformed by her hand into something more than their mere form, imbued with a quiet beauty that spoke volumes. The harsh lines of his own face seemed to soften. His movements, once abrupt and solitary, grew more hesitant, more gentle. He found himself humming old, forgotten tunes, the kind his own mother used to sing, and once, to his profound surprise, he saw a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile touch Ilara's lips as he hummed. It was a fleeting glimpse into a hidden world, a profound affirmation that underneath the layers of trauma and disability, a spirit, vibrant and alive, persisted. The world outside might have abandoned her, deemed her worthless, but here, in this small, isolated cabin, she was finding her voice, not in sound, but in the eloquent silence of her art. The fragile peace they had built was a sanctuary, yet Elias felt the subtle pressure of the outside world beginning to press in. Whispers from the nearest town, a place he rarely visited, occasionally reached him through the few trappers and merchants who ventured deep into the woods. The story of the purchase had undoubtedly spread, distorted and magnified by rural gossip. He imagined the judgmental stares, the hushed conversations, the condemnation in their eyes. He knew his actions were unorthodox, perhaps even unlawful in the eyes of the law, yet he felt a fierce primal protectiveness stir within him, a refusal to let the world reclaim what he now considered his. He saw the world through Ilara's art, through her eyes, and in doing so saw its ugliness more clearly than ever. The stepfather, a man named Silas, was known for his cruel cunning, his reputation as a man who valued profit above all else. Elias remembered the cold calculation in Silas's eyes, the way he had spoken of Ilara as if she were a defective tool. He worried about Silas's return, about the inevitable consequences of their grim transaction. A new tension, a low hum beneath the surface of their quiet lives began to grow. Ilara, though still silent, seemed to sense it. Her sketches, once filled with the peaceful forms of nature, began to take on a darker hue. She would draw faces, contorted and indistinct, their features blurred by a palpable fear, and Elias recognized, with a chilling certainty, the shadow of Silas in those tormented visages. He started keeping his axe closer at hand, checking the cabin's sturdy locks more often, his sleep growing lighter, more restless. He knew the terms of their agreement had been flimsy, a verbal transaction steeped in the shadows of illegality. What did a man like Silas do when he realized he had given away something valuable for too little, or when he simply wished to reassert his control, his perverse ownership? The thought gnawed at him, a relentless worm in the core of his newfound tranquility. He would watch Ilara as she sketched, her brow furrowed in concentration, and he felt a growing, desperate need to protect that fragile spark of life within her. He was a lumberjack, a man of simple needs and brutal strength, but he knew, with the weight of experience, that some battles could not be won with an axe. This looming threat, this ghost of Silas, seemed to hang in the crisp, cold air, a promise of inevitable conflict, threatening to shatter the delicate glass of their unexpected world. A particularly harsh winter descended, cloaking the forest in a shroud of white and deepening their isolation. Yet within the cabin, a quiet warmth began to glow. Elias, guided by Ilara's unspoken cues, had begun to learn her silent language. He understood the subtle shift in her gaze, the slight tilt of her head, the rare, almost imperceptible tremor of a hand reaching for a specific pencil. She had started to use rudimentary pictograms in her sketches to communicate simple needs or observations. A drawing of a steaming cup next to a shivering figure meant she was cold and wanted tea. A sketch of the sun meant she wanted to be carried outside, even for a moment, to feel its weak warmth. These small victories, these tiny breakthroughs, filled Elias with a profound sense of purpose. He saw not a disabled girl, but a resilient spirit, a keen observer, a budding artist. He taught her, through painstaking repetition and gentle guidance, how to hold a spoon, how to sip from a cup, how to point at the objects she desired. Her progress was slow, agonizingly so at times, but each tiny step felt like a monumental leap. He began to read aloud to her from his few tattered books, his gruff voice softening as he described distant lands and fantastical creatures, watching for the light in her eyes that told him she understood, that she was imagining. He even found himself humming a lullaby, one he hadn't thought of since he was a child, as he tucked her into her cot one night, a profound tenderness welling up within him. The world outside, cruel and indifferent, seemed to recede, replaced by the intricate, demanding, yet deeply rewarding world they were building together. But even as this fragile hope blossomed, the premonition of danger persisted, a faint, unsettling hum beneath the surface of their quiet lives. He knew, with a certainty born of experience, that such profound peace was often a precursor to upheaval. He sometimes found himself staring at the rough wooden door, listening to the wind, his senses heightened, as if waiting for a knock that would shatter their fragile sanctuary. The thought of Silas, a dark shadow, occasionally flickered in his mind, reminding him that the initial transaction, the grim bargain, was not truly resolved. This blossoming of hope was beautiful, yes, but also terrifyingly vulnerable, a beacon in a storm that had yet to break. He often wondered about the what came in the mail after that original dark deal, a phrase that had been whispered to him by the departing Silas, a chilling and vague threat, a reminder that the transaction was not truly complete until some final, unknown condition was met. Then the mail arrived. It was delivered by a young, nervous postman, whose horse seemed spooked by the isolation, and the silent, imposing figure of Elias. The postman quickly handed over a single thick envelope, his eyes avoiding Elias's, before turning his horse and disappearing back down the snow-covered track, leaving a palpable sense of unease in his wake. Elias stood there, the envelope heavy in his hand, its presence a stark intrusion into the quiet rhythm of their lives. It was official-looking, sealed with a dark wax stamp that bore an unfamiliar crest, and addressed to him, not by name, but by the crude description of his remote dwelling. He felt a cold dread trickle down his spine. This was it, the long-anticipated consequence, the ghost of Silas made manifest. He brought the letter inside, his movements stiff and deliberate, the silence in the cabin suddenly suffocating. Ilara, sensing his tension, stopped her sketching, her small head tilted, her wide eyes fixed on the ominous envelope. He broke the seal, his thumb pressing down on the brittle wax, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed room. The contents were not what he expected. Not a summons, not a demand for more money, not a threat from Silas himself. Instead, it was a formal notice, a legal document from a distant city, bearing the seal of a lawyer's office. It spoke of a deceased client, a will and an inheritance. Elias's brow furrowed, his illiteracy a sudden crushing weight. He could barely decipher the bold print, let alone the intricate legal jargon. But one name repeatedly etched into the document leaped out at him, a name that struck him cold. Ilara. His Ilara. The girl he had bought. The document stated that Ilara, daughter of a wealthy industrialist, had been declared missing years ago, presumed dead, her considerable inheritance held in trust. The very man who had sold her, Silas, was her stepfather indeed, but not by blood. He had been married to her mother, who had recently passed away, revealing this shocking truth in her final testament. Silas, it became clear, had not just sold a girl. He had sold an heiress, hoping to permanently remove her and claim her fortune for himself through a long-concocted deception, having faked her death years prior. The open loop of mystery, the unanswered questions of Ilara's past, suddenly crashed down, revealing a darker, more predatory truth than Elias could have ever conceived. The silence in the cabin now throbbed with the enormity of this revelation, a truth that redefined everything. The revelation of Ilara's true identity, her vast inheritance, and the monstrous deceit of Silas struck Elias like a physical blow. The legal document lay crumpled in his hand, a testament to a world far beyond his comprehension, a world of grand deceit and immense wealth. He had thought he was buying a burden, a silent companion to his lonely life, only to discover he had stumbled into a web of aristocratic treachery. The very man who had sold her, Silas, was not just cruel, but cunning beyond measure, a man who had orchestrated a chillingly elaborate plan to seize a fortune meant for a child he had sought to erase from existence. The memory of Silas's icy eyes, his dismissive words about Ilara, now gained a horrifying new dimension. He hadn't just been ridding himself of an inconvenience. He had been burying a truth, hoping it would stay buried forever in the remote wilderness. Elias looked at Ilara, her small form still, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the cabin, and saw not just the girl he had slowly come to cherish, but a victim of a profound, heart-wrenching injustice. He felt a surge of righteous fury, a protective instinct stronger than any he had ever known. The world, he now understood, was a far more treacherous place than even his solitary existence had led him to believe. He saw the irony, stark and biting. He, a simple lumberjack, a man considered an outcast, had unwittingly become the guardian of a fortune and of a truth that could shatter powerful lives. The document also mentioned a deadline, a legal technicality that required Ilara to be presented, to be found by a certain date, or her inheritance would automatically transfer to the next of kin, Silas. The tension in the cabin was now palpable, no longer a quiet hum, but a thrumming vibration of impending crisis. Elias knew what he had to do. He had to bring Ilara back to the world that had abandoned her, the world that now desperately sought her. But that world was also the one that had allowed Silas to flourish, and it was the world that Silas would control. The danger was not just from the law, but from Silas himself, who would surely stop at nothing to prevent Ilara from reclaiming what was rightfully hers. The long simmering suspense of their isolated lives had finally reached a terrifying crescendo, forcing Elias to confront a world he had long sought to avoid, a world where the stakes were infinitely higher than he could have ever imagined. The journey was perilous, a brutal passage through a winter landscape that seemed to reflect the turmoil within Elias. He carried Ilara bundled in furs, her small weight a constant reminder of the immense responsibility he bore. Every creak of the snow, every snap of a twig sounded like a warning. He imagined Silas, a phantom presence pursuing them through the frozen woods, a predator closing in on his lost prey. The closer they got to the distant city, the more the world began to press in. Towns, once distant blurs, became vivid with people, their stares, their whispers, their judgments. Elias felt their eyes on him, a lumbering, unkempt man carrying a silent, ethereal child, an image that surely ignited the worst of their assumptions. He knew he was a spectacle, an enigma, but he pushed onward, driven by a fierce, singular purpose. He saw now with chilling clarity the true extent of Silas's malevolence. Not content with mere abandonment, he had tried to erase Ilara, to literally bury her alive in the wilderness, allowing her to become a shadow, a forgotten echo, while he planned to seize her rightful legacy. This was a battle not just for money, but for Ilara's very existence, for her right to breathe and be seen. He thought of the small wooden bird she still clutched, a symbol of the fragile hope they carried. His own past, riddled with moments of being discarded, of feeling like a burden, fueled his resolve. He would not let this happen to Ilara. The city loomed on the horizon, a monstrous sprawl of brick and smoke, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of his forest home. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, a sense of stepping into an arena where the rules were unknown and the adversaries ruthless. The air grew thick with the scent of coal smoke and human congestion, a suffocating embrace after the clean, crisp air of the woods. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the true confrontation, the pivotal emotional climax of this dark tale, was now upon them. The grand machinery of the law, of society, was about to be engaged, and he, a simple man, stood at its terrifying precipice, with Ilara, the silent heiress, a beacon of truth in his arms. The lawyer's office was a mausoleum of hushed voices and polished mahogany, a world away from the honest grit of the forest. Elias, still caked with the snow and mud of his journey, felt acutely out of place, a rough-hewn statue in a room of delicate china. Silas was already there, impeccably dressed, his face a mask of feigned concern, his eyes, however, still holding that telltale glint of predatory calculation. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of years of deceit. Elias, a man of few words, let Ilara's quiet presence speak for itself. He placed her gently on a plush velvet chair, her small hand still clutching the wooden bird. Her stillness, which had once been a source of his despair, now became her strength, her profound silence amplifying the grotesque nature of Silas's lies. The legal proceedings began, a bewildering dance of words and clauses, but Elias understood the core. Silas was denying everything, claiming Ilara was an imposter, or perhaps simply a child Elias had kidnapped from elsewhere, seeking to exploit her. The accusations hung heavy, designed to undermine Elias's credibility, to paint him as a villain. But then, a moment of profound revelation, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. Elara, her gaze fixed on Silas, slowly, deliberately lifted her small hand and, with painstaking effort, pointed a trembling finger at him. Then, with a surge of strength that seemed to defy her physical limitations, she used her other hand to sketch a single, unmistakable image in the air, a silhouette of a man with a raised hand, a threatening gesture, followed by a crude but clear depiction of a small, terrified figure, cowering. The movement was simple, primal, yet it pierced the sterile formality of the room like a lightning bolt. It was a silent scream, a profound accusation, a memory made visible. Silas's composure fractured. His face, once so calm, contorted in a brief, uncontrolled flash of fury and recognition. The lawyer, a man accustomed to the cold logic of the law, watched with a stunned, almost reverent awe. Elara, by her silent testimony, had become the most powerful witness of all, her truth cutting through the layers of Silas's calculated lies. The room fell silent, the only sound the quiet, rhythmic breathing of Elara, a testament to her undeniable presence. The long, winding journey, the whispers of the past, the gradual unraveling of mystery, all converged in this singular, breathtaking moment, an emotional climax that hinged on the raw, unadulterated truth of a child. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Elara's silent testimony, amplified by the irrefutable evidence of the will and the layers of deceit meticulously uncovered by the lawyers, shattered Silas's carefully constructed facade. His lies crumbled, revealing the rotten core of his ambition. He was swiftly arrested, his protests hollow against the weight of the truth. Elias watched, a grim satisfaction settling in his heart, as the man who had bought and sold a child, who had sought to erase a life for greed, was led away, his power finally stripped bare. The whirlwind that followed was disorienting. Elara, now recognized as the rightful heiress, was suddenly surrounded by a retinue of caretakers, medical professionals, and distant relatives, all eager to claim a piece of her, or at least her considerable fortune. Elias found himself pushed to the periphery, a silent, watchful guardian amidst the clamor. He saw the genuine care in some, the calculated interest in others. He knew his role in her life, the one he had chosen and stumbled into, was changing. He was no longer her sole protector, her only connection to humanity. She was entering a world he could not follow, a world of grand estates and societal expectations. But he also saw, in Elara's eyes, a quiet understanding, a connection that transcended words and wealth. She would still seek him out in the bustling rooms, her gaze finding his, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. Their bond, forged in the crucible of isolation and unspoken suffering, remained. Elias knew his place was not in the gilded cages of the city. His heart longed for the quiet embrace of the forest, for the familiar rhythm of the axe and the smell of pine. He had seen the corruption of the world, its insatiable hunger for power and wealth, and he knew he belonged elsewhere. Yet a hopeful resolution, a profound peace settled within him. Elara was safe, cared for, and her future, though complex, was now filled with possibilities, not despair. He had fulfilled his unwitting promise. The mail, which had brought such terror, had also brought justice. He had perhaps saved her, and in doing so, had found a redemption he never thought possible. His journey from lonely lumberjack to the unlikely hero of a dramatic tale was complete. He would return to his cabin, not to the empty silence of before, but to a quiet solitude enriched by the profound, transformative experience of loving and protecting another soul. The forest would welcome him back, a sanctuary once more, but this time it held the echoes of a profound connection, a life truly lived.